The Galactic Academy of Interstellar Minds stood as the pinnacle of education within the Milky Way. Its crystalline spires hovered gracefully above the surface of PX9, a planet famed for its breathtaking skies, made of shimmering crystals and a gravity-defying atmosphere. It was here that brilliant minds from across the galaxy gathered, united in their pursuit of knowledge that spanned from artificial gravity manipulation to the mysteries of dark matter. The corridors of the Academy were alive with ideas that were far beyond the comprehension of most civilizations. Emma Reynolds, a young human woman from Earth, stepped hesitantly through the grand glass gates of the Academy for the very first time. Earth, long considered a developing world by the Galactic Alliance, had only recently sent its first class of interstellar students into the cosmos. Humans were often regarded as ambitious yet ill-prepared for the complexities of galactic academia, and their contributions to intergalactic study had only begun to make an impression in recent years. Emma, one of only 3 humans accepted into this year's class, carried the weight of her entire species' reputation with her. The halls buzzed with the energy of countless alien students, each of them an embodiment of different cultures, shapes, and colors. As Emma made her way toward the physics department, she passed a massive xylem, its iridescent scales catching the light. A group of Narians followed closely behind, their bodies aglow with soft bioluminescence, their quiet laughter filling the air. As they passed by, Emma overheard snatches of their conversation. The Narians spoke softly, clearly discussing the new human among them. Though she couldn't understand their words, the curious glances and suppressed giggles were more than enough to make her feel out of place. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to remain composed. She had earned her place here. Her scores had placed her in the top 5% of applicants, a remarkable achievement for any human. Yet, despite the accolades, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she didn't belong in this world of advanced intellects. She clenched her bag's straps tightly and quickened her pace, determined to prove herself worthy of being here. The lecture hall for advanced quantum mechanics was one of the most impressive on campus, its spherical architecture ensuring that every student had an unobstructed view of the holographic projections presented by the professor. When Emma entered, the murmur of students gradually quieted. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her as she entered, each gaze a mix of curiosity, amusement, or outright disbelief. Emma focused her attention on finding a seat in the middle of the room, avoiding the scrutiny of her peers. At the front of the hall stood Professor Zero, a towering figure whose translucent skin emitted a soft, ethereal glow. Her elongated head and 7-fingered hands gave her a nearly otherworldly appearance. Known as one of the galaxy's brightest minds, Zero was both highly respected and feared for her ruthless intellect and uncompromising nature. She was particularly known for her disdain toward lesser species, and humans in particular had long been the target of her scorn. Emma's arrival did not escape notice. Zero's piercing gaze swept the room, pausing for a moment on Emma, and the faintest smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Ah," she began, her voice reverberating through the hall like a melodic hum. "It appears we have a new addition to the class this cycle. A human." She drew out the word human, as if it were an amusing oddity. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Emma's cheeks flushed, but she kept her expression as neutral as possible. "Miss Reynolds, I believe?" Zero continued, extending one of her long fingers in Emma's direction. "I assume Earth's primitive educational system has adequately prepared you for the rigors of this course?" Emma's heart sank, but she met Zero's unyielding gaze, determined to rise to the challenge. "I believe they have, Professor," Emma answered, her tone unwavering. A murmur rippled through the room. It was rare for a student to directly challenge Zero's subtle barbs. Zero tilted her head, her smile widening. "We'll see," she replied cryptically. The lecture began, and Zero plunged into the intricacies of multidimensional quantum fields. Holographic projections of swirling equations and dynamic models flooded the space, seemingly beyond understanding. Most of the class scrambled to type notes into their devices or whispered amongst themselves, struggling to keep up with the professor's rapid-fire explanations. Emma, however, was completely absorbed. The equations sparked a memory of a problem she'd tackled back on Earth when working on a simulation for gravitational wave interference. She furiously scribbled in her notebook, making unexpected connections. As the class went on, Emma became aware of the growing attention on her. Whenever she raised her hand to ask a question, a hushed silence fell over the room, as if waiting for the human to falter. But Emma's questions were sharp, precise, and elicited hesitant nods from some of her peers. Still, she felt Zero's icy, calculating gaze on her, as if she were biding her time for Emma's inevitable mistake. When the lecture drew to a close, Zero turned to face the class, her voice commanding. For our next session, we will examine the ramifications of quantum entanglement across interdimensional planes. To prepare, I'll leave you with a challenge. With a flick of her wrist, a complicated equation materialized in the air, glowing and pulsating as it shifted. The class buzzed with murmurs. This was a far more advanced problem than any they had encountered. Miss Reynolds, Zero's voice sliced through the chatter. Since you're so confident, perhaps you'd like to attempt solving it now? The room fell into an oppressive silence. Emma's stomach clenched. She hadn't even begun to process the equation, and Zero's challenge was clearly meant to embarrass her. Every student in the room focused their attention on her, eager for her failure. Emma inhaled deeply and stood up. "I'll try," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety tightening her chest. She approached the holographic board. The symbols swirled around, almost mocking her. Zero's smile returned, and a few students exchanged glances that suggested they already knew the outcome. Emma's hands shook slightly as she reached for the control panel, but she forced herself to push through the fear. She wasn't here to prove anyone wrong. She was here to prove to herself that she belonged. The silence in the lecture hall was thick, nearly suffocating. Her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, each one echoing in the stillness. Every set of eyes, alien or not, fixed on her, their gazes varying from curiosity to thinly veiled amusement, but most seemed to be waiting for her to fail. Professor Zero stood rigidly at the front, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly as she observed the human. The faintest smirk tugged at her lips, a clear sign that this was no ordinary challenge. The equation before Emma was a masterpiece of complexity, an ever-shifting array of symbols that seemed to dance in the air like a living entity. Each line of the equation shimmered with a soft light, morphing as it adjusted to Emma's perspective. This was no ordinary equation. It was the kind of problem she had only encountered in theoretical papers, one rooted in the complexities of multidimensional quantum field dynamics. Though the subject was still emerging on Earth, it had been a topic of significant exploration across the galaxy. Emma's pulse quickened as she stood before the glowing projections, the equation seeming to mock her with its intricate layers, more complex than anything she had tackled in her years of study. She stole a quick glance at Professor Zero, who wore a look of assured superiority, convinced Emma would fail. Around her, her classmates' murmurs grew louder, and Emma caught fragments of their conversations. "She won't last 5 minutes," a tall, crystalline student muttered to his companion, whose jelly-like form rippled in amusement. "Why did they even admit humans?" Another voice sneered, tinged with disdain and pity. "She'll break down. They all do." Emma inhaled deeply, blocking out the whispers. She focused solely on the holographic board, her mind beginning to peel apart the equation's layers. Years of rigorous study on Earth had taught her a crucial lesson. No matter how complex the problem, there was always a way to deconstruct it into simpler parts. The key was to find the unifying thread that connected them all. Her fingers hovered over the control panel, and the equation responded, its symbols shifting in sync with her movements. The interface was user-friendly, but the equations themselves posed an immense challenge. Emma's first instinct was to represent the problem in a two-dimensional format, a technique she had mastered in her Earth studies. As she worked, delicate strands of light spread across the board, forming a simplified map of the core variables. "She's using basic techniques," someone whispered. "She doesn't even grasp the dimensional flux," another added, their voice dripping with derision. Emma tuned them out. The critical murmurs only fueled her determination. She worked quickly, breaking the equation into smaller, manageable sections, recognizing patterns in what seemed like chaos. Slowly, the problem began to take shape in her mind, transforming from an overwhelming puzzle into something solvable. Behind her, Zero's smirk faltered, her expectations of Emma's failure quickly diminishing. The human was not stumbling. Emma moved with steady precision, suggesting she had more control than Zero had anticipated. The professor narrowed her glowing eyes, her interest peaked. "Fascinating," Zero murmured to herself, her tone softer now. Time stretched on as Emma continued, each second feeling heavier under the scrutiny of the class. She reached certain sections of the equation that defied Earth's conventional methods, but she adapted. With logic and intuition as her guide, Emma navigated the unfamiliar aspects of the problem, merging her earthly knowledge with new insights from the academy. As she progressed, a noticeable shift occurred. The whispers around her grew quieter, the mocking smiles evaporated, and even the most skeptical students began to sit up straighter. The glowing lines on the board fell into place, forming a clear framework that even the more advanced alien students could recognize. Emma had not only solved the problem, she had made it comprehensible to everyone in the room. What had begun as a desperate attempt now appeared to be a legitimate solution in the making. "Is she actually solving it?" a voice asked, disbelief evident confident in the tone. "No way," came the reply. "This is impossible. If she's guessing, she's certainly very skilled," another added. A surge of energy filled Emma as the final pieces clicked into place. With precise movements, she manipulated the holographic interface, adjusting variables and recalibrating the calculations until the equation began to stabilize. The chaotic movement of the symbols ceased, replaced by a steady, harmonious pattern. The solution materialized before her eyes, its elegance in stark contrast to the original complexity. The room fell into a heavy silence. Emma took a step back, her hands trembling slightly as she exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. The solution's soft glow illuminated her face, and for a fleeting moment, she stared at it in disbelief. Slowly, she turned to face the room. Professor Zero remained motionless, her expression unreadable as she examined the solution. Her glowing eyes flickered with scrutiny, and her translucent hands tapped softly against the podium. The entire class held their breath, awaiting her response. Finally, Zero spoke, her voice as measured as ever. "Very impressive," she acknowledged, though her tone was tinged with a faint reluctance. She stepped closer to the board, her tall form casting a long shadow. "Your solution is correct, and yet," she paused, letting the tension hang in the air, "your method is unconventional, primitive even. You simplified variables that most advanced civilizations would not dare to touch, and yet," she gestured toward the glowing solution. "It worked." Emma felt a strange mix of pride and defiance. "Sometimes simplicity reveals truths that complexity obscures," she replied, her voice steady. The room erupted in whispers once again, but this time, the tone had shifted. There was no mockery or laughter. Instead, the students spoke in hushed tones of astonishment and even admiration. Zero studied Emma for a long moment before nodding in acknowledgement. "You have earned your place in this class, Miss Reynolds. For now," she turned back to the rest of the room, "let this be a lesson to all of you. Even the most unexpected minds can offer valuable perspectives." As the students began to file out, Emma remained standing, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and triumph. She had done more than solve an equation. She had taken a crucial step toward proving that humanity could hold its own in the stars. The lecture hall was eerily quiet as Emma returned to her seat. The students who had once whispered about her now exchanged glances, their expressions different. Some had already begun reviewing their notes, trying to understand how a human, whom they had considered inferior, had done what few in the galaxy could. Emma could feel their eyes on her, but this time, their stares weren't filled with mockery. She no longer felt like an outsider. Her solution had been validated, and for the first time, that was enough. Yet, Emma knew the hardest part was still ahead, earning respect in a system that was determined to see her as less. Professor Zero remained at the front, her tall, translucent form bathed in the soft glow of Emma's solution. Her expression was unreadable as she stared at the board, hands clasped behind her back. For a moment, Zero appeared lost in thought, clearly unprepared for this outcome. Then, as if shaking off her disbelief, she turned to face the class. This demonstration, Zero began, her voice cold and measured, was not merely about solving an equation. It was a test of perspective, a challenge to look beyond conventional methods and adapt to the unknown. Miss Reynolds has proven she is capable of thinking beyond the limitations of her species. Though the words acknowledged Emma's success, the subtle implication that her achievement was a rare, anomalous event hung in the air. Emma tightened her grip on her notebook but remained silent. She knew this was Zero's way of maintaining control, reminding the class that humanity still had much to prove. Zero continued, "There is one aspect of Miss Reynolds' solution that requires further examination." Her gaze fixed on Emma, and the room seemed to freeze. "Miss Reynolds, please approach the board." Emma's stomach sank. She had hoped the ordeal was over, but Zero's tone made it clear that it was far from finished. Slowly, she stood, taking deliberate steps toward the front of the room. Zero gestured toward the still glowing equation. "Your solution is correct," Zero said, "but your method, simplifying the variables and recalibrating the constants, was, to say the least, unconventional. Why did you choose this approach?" Emma hesitated. The truth was, she hadn't consciously chosen this method. It had been instinct, relying on the problem-solving techniques she had mastered on Earth. But she knew that answer wouldn't satisfy Zero or the class. Taking a deep breath, she began to explain. "On Earth," she said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her throat, "we often face constraints, technological, computational, and even cultural. These limitations push us to think creatively and find solutions that aren't always obvious. When I looked at this equation, I didn't see it as just a puzzle to solve. I saw it as a system with interconnected components, and I focused on simplifying those connections to uncover the underlying structure." Her words lingered in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then, to Emma's surprise, a voice from the back of the room broke the silence. "That's actually brilliant," a voice said. Emma turned to see who had spoken. It was a tall, crystalline alien, his shimmering surface reflecting the holographic light. His multifaceted eyes were wide with genuine respect. He was studying her with newfound admiration. Zero's expression remained neutral, but Emma noticed her glowing eyes flicker just slightly, an almost imperceptible sign of approval. "An interesting perspective," Zero admitted. "Though unconventional, it has merit. However, do not mistake success for mastery, Miss Reynolds. This is only the beginning." Emma nodded, understanding the lesson. She knew better than to argue. She returned to her seat, heart pounding. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. While some students still regarded her with skepticism, others now looked at her with curiosity, and, in some cases, respect. It was a small victory, but for Emma, it felt monumental. The lecture ended soon after, and the students began to file out. Emma hurriedly packed her belongings, hoping to avoid any unwanted confrontations. But as she swung her bag over her shoulder, a tap on her arm stopped her. She turned to see the crystalline alien who had spoken up earlier. Up close, his angular features and refractive surface were even more striking. "Hey," he said, his voice resonating like a soft chime. "That was impressive. I'm Kale, by the way." "Emma," she replied, offering a small smile. Kale tilted his head, his multifaceted eyes glistening. "How did you figure it out?" "That equation stumped even the top students last cycle." Emma hesitated. She wasn't sure how to explain without sounding boastful. "I just looked at it differently, I guess. It reminded me of a problem I worked on back home, so I applied a similar approach." Kale nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever you did, it worked. Don't let Zero's attitude get to you. She's tough on everyone, but she respects talent." "Thanks," Emma said, her smile widening. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt a glimmer of hope that she might find allies here. As Kale walked away, Emma noticed other students glancing her way, some with curiosity, others with a hint of respect. It was a small shift, but enough to give her a sense of belonging she hadn't felt before. Later that evening, Professor Zero sat in her private quarters, reviewing the day's lecture. The holographic projection of Emma's solution hovered before her, its glowing lines casting faint shadows on the walls. Zero studied it intently, her mind conflicted. She had always viewed humans as a curiosity, emerging species with potential, but far from reaching the intellectual heights of the galactic elite. Yet Emma's performance had challenged that belief. Her approach had been unconventional, yes, but it demonstrated a creativity and adaptability Zero rarely saw, even among the most advanced species. Perhaps, Zero murmured to herself, there is more to humanity than I thought. She tapped a control panel, saving the solution for further analysis. For now, she decided, she would observe Emma more closely. The human had solved one problem, but the true test would come in the weeks ahead. Zero was determined to see whether Emma's success was a fluke or the beginning of something extraordinary. The following weeks at the Galactic Academy were a whirlwind for Emma. Her unexpected success in Professor Zero's class had thrust her into the spotlight, for better or worse. The students who had mocked her on the first day now either avoided her or approached her cautiously, seeking discussion. The small victories, like Kale's acknowledgement, were comforting, but Emma quickly realized her newfound respect came with heightened expectations. Meanwhile, Zero's attitude toward Emma remained cool and distant. She neither praised nor reprimanded Emma in class, but Emma could feel the professor's sharp gaze on her more than anyone else. It was as though Zero was waiting for her to fail, to prove that her initial success had been nothing more than a lucky fluke. One day, Professor Zero announced a special project, an advanced practical test designed to culminate everything they had learned so far. Emma braced herself for what was to come, knowing that this project would be the real challenge to her standing at the academy. Each student was tasked with solving a multivariable quantum dynamics problem, one designed not only to assess their knowledge but also their ability to innovate under pressure. What made this test unique was that it would be completed in pairs, with the partner assignments made by Zero herself. Emma's heart sank when she saw her partner's name, Sorth, a tall, insectoid alien who had been one of her harshest critics since her arrival. Sorth had never made an effort to conceal his disdain for humans, often dismissing Emma's questions and comments in class with mocking clicks of his mandibles. The assignment took place in a vast spherical simulation chamber. Each pair was assigned a different scenario, and their task was to stabilize an artificially created quantum field that was on the verge of collapse. The fields were unpredictable, with their variables shifting rapidly in response to the students' actions. Success required not only precision but also seamless collaboration. As Emma and Sorth entered their assigned chamber, the tension between them was palpable. "Let me be clear," Sorth said, his voice clicking with irritation. "I will not let let your primitive methods drag down my score. Stay out of my way and we'll get through this. Emma clenched her jaw but nodded. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to prove herself. The simulation began, and the holographic quantum field erupted before them. It was a swirling mass of equations, glowing symbols, and unstable energy. Sorth immediately took the lead, inputting calculations with swift, precise movements. Emma stepped back, initially observing his approach. He was undeniably skilled, but his rigid adherence to conventional methods left little room for adaptability. As the simulation grew more chaotic, his strategies began to falter. "This isn't working," Emma said, finally stepping forward. Sorth shot her a glare. "Don't interfere. I can handle this." "No, you can't," Emma replied firmly, pointing to the shifting variables in the holographic field. "The system is changing faster than you can compensate for. If we keep trying to control it directly, it's going to collapse." Sorth hesitated, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "And what do you propose, human?" Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to simplify the system, identify its core variables, and focus on stabilizing those. It's risky, but it's our best chance." Sorth hesitated again, then, with a begrudging nod, stepped aside. "Fine, but if this fails, it's on you." Emma dove into the calculations. Her mind raced as she applied the same unconventional approach she had used during the first challenge. This time, however, the stakes were higher. The complexity of the simulation pushed her to her limits, and the instability of the field grew more volatile with each passing second. Still, Emma remained calm, letting her instincts guide her through the chaos. As she worked, Emma noticed Sorth watching her closely. Initially, his expression was one of skepticism, but as the field began to stabilize under her adjustments, his demeanor shifted. To her surprise, he began to assist her, his calculations complementing hers in a way neither of them had expected. For the first time, they were working together as a team. The quantum field finally stabilized with a flash of light, the swirling chaos replaced by a calm, harmonious glow. A soft chime signaled the end of the simulation, and the holographic interface powered down. Emma and Sorth stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. "We did it," Emma said, her voice laced with relief. Sorth clicked his mandibles, his usual arrogance replaced by something resembling respect. "Your methods are unconventional but effective. Perhaps humans are not as primitive as I thought." Emma allowed herself a small smile. "Thanks. You weren't so bad yourself." When the results were announced, Emma and Sorth's team was revealed to have achieved the highest score and nearly perfect stabilization of the quantum field. The rest of the class erupted in murmurs, and even Professor Zero's ever-neutral expression softened slightly as she reviewed their performance. At the end of the day, Emma found herself summoned to Professor Zero's office. The room was stark and minimalist, its walls lined with glowing panels that displayed complex equations and scientific data. Zero sat behind a sleek, transparent desk, her glowing eyes fixed on Emma as she entered. "Miss Reynolds," Zero began, her tone unreadable, "your performance today was unexpected." Emma remained silent, unsure whether this was meant as a compliment or a critique. Zero leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "You have demonstrated an ability to think beyond the constraints of your species' limitations. Your success in the simulation was not due to luck, but to ingenuity, an attribute that is often undervalued in this institution." Emma met her gaze, her confidence growing. "Thank you," Zero nodded slowly. "However, do not mistake this for the end of your challenges. If anything, your success will make your journey here more difficult. The expectations placed upon you will only grow." "I understand," Emma replied, her voice firm, "and I'm ready." For a moment, Zero studied her in silence. Then, to Emma's surprise, the professor's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "We shall see." As Emma left the office, she felt a clarity she hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy. She had faced challenges, endured skepticism, and proven herself, not only to others but to herself. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt truly prepared for whatever lay ahead. Outside, the crystal spires of the academy gleamed under the twin suns of PX9, a reminder of the vast galaxy that awaited her. Emma smiled. This was only the beginning.